Right. Okay. Have you eaten then?
Yes, I have. Anytime you want to eat, let me know. I've got lemon meringue pie and strawberries and cream.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Right. Okay. Well, I'd like to just start at at the beginning really, and just ask, is there any sort of anything from your background, your parents, or your early life? Were you always interested in evolution, or was it something that came very much later on?
Well, I was interested in it, but not particularly. I mean, up to when I was 16, it wasn't definite which way I would go, arts and sciences, but the school said, if you try and get in on science, you'll get in, but you need a scholarship and you're more likely to get that on the art side. So I just followed their lead and went that way.
And have you always lived around this part of the world?
Yes, I was born in Pontypridd, down the valley there. My husband was born in Elizabeth, over the mountain there. And we were in Lancashire after we married, then we came back home.
And what did your parents do? I mean, was there any sort of medical link there?
No, my father was, he worked in the colliery, not as a miner, but as a fanman driving the thing. He was sort of engineering, but he was on the dole for about 9 years, because when the Depression hit, the sort of key men like that found it harder to get in because the jobs only cropped up.
That must have had a big impact then in your early life, but the Depression around that time was
well, it sort of had more impact on my parents than on me, because for the kids, everybody was in the same boat, you enjoy yourself, you don't, especially in a place like this. I mean, if you lived in London, there were rich people all around, you might sort of feel, well, I'm on the bottom of the heap, but there weren't any rich people around them in the same boat. I enjoyed my childhood. I was lucky that I was an only child. That made it tough. I mean, if there'd been 6 or 7 of us, it would have been more.
Right. And in terms of were you always curious about, sort of evolution? I mean, I don't want, if this is a too personal a question, just say so. But I mean, were you religious? I mean, were your parents religious, or did you reject religion, or?
My mother went to chapel as a Baptist. My grandmother, who lived with us, our grandparents living with us, she was converted by one of the evangelists, and so she was. But my father was an agnostic, and I used to listen to them arguing, and I thought from the word go that he was right.
Right. So there was never any doubt in your mind?
Never any doubt.
And you never had any pressure to go to church or anything like that?
Only when we were small, he used to sort of button us up in the best coats and send us to Sunday school. So that I had all the indoctrination, and I wasn't particularly rebelling against it, except the Sunday school was so boring.
Right.
But after I'd heard any argument between my father and my grandmother, I mean, it seemed transparent that he had it right and she had it wrong.
And so when you say that it was the school that pointed you in the direction of literacy, literature.
Yes. Yes.
And so what did you do at university? You did English literature?
English language and literature at Oxford, yes.
So did you get a scholarship in the local school?
I got an exhibition, which is much the same thing. You get money with it.
And at school, were you interested in biology specifically, or science generally? Was it very close?
I was interested in biology. I took it up to O levels, up to 16, I suppose. But I mean, it wasn't sort of a controversial thing then. It was just like a thing you had to learn to do. You would sort of cut up things to rabbits and frogs and things.
And when you did English literature, I mean, what was your sort of passion in that subject? What were the things that you really were interested in as a student at Oxford?
I liked the language side. Etymology and stuff was fascinating to me. On the literature side, I was not, frankly, very fascinated because they didn't teach you anything later than about 1890 in Oxford then, so that current literature, which I was reading avidly, wasn't the kind of thing that was discussed up there. And what I did in Oxford, I'm afraid, was just do the minimum necessary on the academic side and take part in university politics.
Right. So you got into politics at the university?
Yes, I was the chairman of the Democratic Socialist Club for the university.
That's interesting. So and sort of what sort of were the main sort of issues at that time? Was it women's rights from that point on?
Women's rights had not been heard of. They had been totally forgotten. They never came up at all. No, it was 1939. It was about the war, it was about the Cold War, it was about the Communist Party defending Stalin's invasion of Finland and stuff like that. It was all very hot issues and controversial issues. And I was also taking the line. Well, the club that I sort of was leading later was set up by, you won't remember them, I guess, Tony Crossland and Roy Jenkins would have heard of. Because
So did you know Roy Jenkins?
Yes, yes.
And so you were, have you always been a member of the Social Democrats, is that?
Well, it's the Labour Party, really. They had to call it that
those
because
days,
the Labour Club
before
had been captured by the Communists and they,
right.
they kept the title. No, it was Labour Party politics. And yes, I've been in the Labour Party all now. Yes.
I actually voted Labour today for the first time in my life.
Did you?
That's right, which is ironic, but anyway.
Well, my husband was further to left and I was
Right.
a good deal. He fought in Spain in the Spanish Civil War.
That's interesting. So your degree then was in English language as well as English literature. So you learned
English language
about
literature, yes.
so the structure of the language and
Yes.
and so you did all that. That's interesting.
The Anglo-Saxon and Beowulf and stuff.
Sort of like history of the language. Or
Yes, that's right. How it changes and where words come from. I just find that fascinating.
Okay, so when you sort of were coming out of university then, what sort of did you know what you wanted to do, or were you just sort of drifting along?
I went into the Workers' Education Association, teaching adults in little villages. Yes, I mean, my head was then mostly full of politics. I didn't start writing until I was over 30, because that's another thing about the university literature courses. It trains you up to be a critic, a literary critic. But if you have any pretensions to write imaginative stuff of your own, you've got this little Oxford critic there reading it and thinking this is absolute rubbish, and you haven't got the nerve to send it anywhere. You've got to wait for that to wear off before you can write anything, seems to me.
In terms of the language, did you? I mean, are any of your close ancestors Welsh speakers?
Well, yes, I'm half Welsh by blood, but my mother was from Somerset, so it was not the language of the household. It was the second language I learned in school.
Oh, so you do speak Welsh?
Well, not fluently enough to hold a conversation. I could get by on it if I was forced to conduct my life in Welsh. I could make myself understood.
Do people around here speak Welsh too?
Not. It hasn't held up much in valleys. I mean, it's now a sort of revival situation that they learn it because they're keen on it or because they're members of the Welsh Nationalists or something like that, and they think it should be right.
It's correct to learn to speak.